This is Peter Helland and Pastor Mario Sims on Citizens for Community Media. And we have called the show our Judicial System versus the Law of God.
Correct. And
there's been a verse that I've been always thinking about, and I think it's relevant for America. It's Proverbs 29:4. The NIV says, "By justice a king gives a country stability, but those who are greedy for bribes tear it down." King James says, "The king by judgment establisheth the land, but he that receiveth gifts overthroweth it." Titus says, "They teach things which they ought not to for filthy lucre's sake."
Yeah.
And I guess, okay, we're looking at the judicial system. My dad was a lawyer. And one time I'm talking to Greg Ball, who was the pro-life attorney.
Right.
And I don't even know if he's alive. I heard that he died maybe. But
yeah, I don't.
I remember one time he called the judges like three stooges. And then when Indiana got rid of the law that required an oath in the court. In other words, Daniel Webster said the court is based on a person's oath. In other words, if they're not telling the truth, the court's over. It's gone. Right. And why? Because how could you establish the truth back in those days? It was you had to believe that you would go to hell if you were lying. Right. So if you didn't believe that you would go to hell for lying, your witness was disfranchised. Yeah. The lawyer should say, "Judge, we can't accept his testimony. He doesn't believe liars go to hell." Okay? Now, this shocks our system, okay? Because, now this is, you work for lawyers, you know the law pretty well, not as a lawyer, but as a paralegal and that. But Greg Ball told me, and now he also said, and actually I was with him at your church with Pastor Parker one time, and he said, well, he didn't believe you could be a Christian and a lawyer at the same time, okay? Now, that's another subject. Yeah. Okay. And he apparently went back to the law. Right. But that was his initial, because apparently he saw that the legal system and how it, the truth that it goes with was contrary to, the Christian, the law of God. Right. But he said, well, in the Greek, the word lawyer means one who devours society. Right. Okay. And I wrote that when I described my case for the Notre Dame Observer. Right. Okay, when the graduation class occurred in mid-May, I happened to write the feature article. This is 1997, I think. The feature article, and it was about my case to the Supreme Court, and I closed it by quoting Greg Ball. I said, the word lawyer means one who devours society, but I was careful to say not all lawyers are bad. Sure, okay. And
that's always needs to be added. And of course, we remember many times who Jesus conflicted with were the teachers of the law. So I think that this, again, goes back to the Bible. For me, when you mentioned the topic, I went into prayer, and I wanted to center my comments on the Bible. Because as we talk about the justice system and the rhetoric behind its application, just as you touched on your case that ended up with the Supreme Court. I had a similar case, and as you mentioned that my knowledge of the law, I never attended law school, of course. It came after I was wrongly convicted, after it announced I was going to run for mayor in South Bend and was attacked. Evidence was planted. I fought for years by myself. I had to learn the law pro se because my opponents were Joe Kernan, Mike Barnes, who was the elected prosecutor, who was eventually planted in the Indiana Court of Appeals by Joe Kernan. He had never sat on the bench prior to receiving an appellate seat. And all of that, including appointing Judge John Marnoka as the chief judge here, who was my prosecutor. He worked for Mike Barnes, and they essentially put together a case to using my wife at the time to give her child sole custody of our son. So I was faced with a situation in this wilderness experience where no lawyer would represent me because of the politics.
But in a way, I don't normally talk this way, but in a way you were Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah, I guess you can use it
I mean,
that
I'm just
way.
saying, by other means.
Well, yeah, I like it. I like to look at it the way, because what I try and do is see everything through the eyes of Christ. Because I remember what Pontius Pilate said when Jesus was standing there. He said, "What's truth?" There is Republican truth and Democrat truth and left truth and right truth and black truth and white truth.
Well, look at what Pilate did.
Yeah,
He said, this guy's innocent.
Right.
He knew he was innocent.
Right.
He everything showed that he was innocent. He went through the whole trial. Jesus was 100% innocent, proven he was innocent, and Pilate still let him be crucified.
Well, look at your case, the case that I'll let you fill in on that. In my case, where in April of 2019, the law enforcement officer finally stepped forth and bragged to a reporter he knew and thought, he felt comfortable with, that he had planted evidence to gain my conviction. And then when she went and filed a police report and told several public officials here and an activist that what he had said, he threatened her life, forced her to move from Indiana to California. We put all that before a trial court in St. Joe County, the Court of Appeals, the Indiana Supreme Court, and ultimately the United States Supreme Court. My lawyers, one was as I said, 20-year a law enforcement officer in Elkhart. He headed the Elkhart County Drug Task Force, and then ultimately went to law school, became a lawyer. My other lawyer was a deputy prosecutor in LaPorte County, city attorney, experienced trial lawyer in criminal and civil. They were blown away by the non-reception of the clear, undisputed. No one that represented Tim Corbett, this law enforcement officer, ever placed anything in the court denying the statement made by the reporter that he had bragged about planting evidence to gain my wrongful conviction and then threatened her. No one ever. So they were shocked to the core. These are lawyers.
Right, but like we were talking earlier, I took that law class. It was a law class by...
About pro se litigant?
Yeah, a fella. But what happened was, when I was doing my case, I went to the federal district court, okay, with
the Seventh
Robert
Circuit?
Miller, right here. No, I went to the Seventh Circuit, but I started
Northern
right here.
District first. You
right,
started
right
Robert
here.
Miller, right.
And I lost, okay, and Robert Miller was very dishonest, in my opinion. Okay.
Well, you knew the truth, so you could say that. It's not your opinion.
It's terrible.
Remember that we're here to talk about the truth of law and justice.
And don't forget, and he's a 30, from what I know, a 33-degree Mason.
Well, that's a problem.
And his dad was
that's a problem in itself.
And his dad graduated a year before my dad at Notre Dame, right. And his dad was a 33-degree Mason, and his dad put him in a position of a judge like soon after law school.
Again, the Bible says you can't serve two masters. Okay, I'll just drop that there. That's truth.
So anyway, then it caught me off guard, and I'm doing this all by myself.
Sure.
Even though my dad's a lawyer, I don't know one thing. I didn't know one thing about the law. So I was big in the pro-life movement, and there was a guy from Canada staying at Richard Bratton's that you know, and he said, you need to get a hold of this Gene Zimmerman in Milwaukee, which they had a huge pro-life group in Milwaukee. Matt Truella, okay, he's kind of well known. And so I went to him, and he said, get affidavits. Okay, what's an affidavit? I mean,
sure.
And so I'm getting them, and that was helpful, and then I got the lawyer at Notre Dame who was from British Columbia. His dad was on the Supreme Court of British Columbia. So he, through Charlie Rice and Professor Rhodes, we went to the Seventh Circuit. They were telling me I should go on pro se because I knew the case.
Right, sure.
But he didn't know it. Right. But you have a fool. If you're got a fool.
Well, but who makes that up? They make that
exactly.
up. Exactly.
So I probably should have done it myself because I knew it inside and out.
Right.
Well, he got blown away. But then we did appeal it to the Supreme Court, which is super hard. But I ended up, because I had Notre Dame connections.
Right.
Okay. I ended up getting about the best attorney in the country on that. So it ended up becoming front headlines.
That you'd file your precipice for cert.
Yeah.
Asking them
certiorari. Wendell Bird out of Atlanta.
Okay.
And he had one of the best cases in '86, like the leading case of the year in a deal with creationism. So my case had a little bit of creationism in him. But yeah, so my sister was in Korea and she was teaching a class on American culture, and she decided, well, let me look this up. Found out that the day that on that decision, CNN News for Korea and probably all the other countries, High Court turns down 2 First Amendment cases.
They denied cert, yeah.
Yeah, but it hit the front headlines for America that day.
Yeah.
Okay, but not here. They tried to black it out here. You know how they do that.
Well, that's because the media is controlled.
Right, the media had it.
Unlike you, during the time I was in prison, like I said, because my case was so political, and Curtin was lieutenant governor, then governor, and Barnes is in the Court of Appeals, so any appeal would be dead on arrival, and anything in the lower court, because the guy who prosecuted me was now the chief judge of the St. Joe County Court, was dead on arrival. But because in Indiana, for inmates, you either have to have an attorney to do any filings, or you have to have trained staff. I was designated as the person who would assist inmates. Because of that, I learned in the law library, I was paid $30 a month, and that was my job.
$1 a day.
Yeah, for 7:30 in the morning to 3 o'clock, I worked in the law library, and I learned the law from reading the law.
Well, I was reading about Thomas Jefferson. All of them. He read the law for
Right.
2 years, and
Right.
boom, he's arguing cases right and left.
Right.
All he did was read the law for 2 years. Lincoln, he didn't go to law school.
And so ultimately, I filed a lawsuit on behalf of all the inmates because of the amount of the telephone calls. I showed that you're charging the poorest the most. And so we had victories. My case initially was reversed twice and ended up both times in front of Judge Jordan, who it turned out we discovered her daughter was
Everybody
raped by
knew that.
Well, I didn't know.
Oh, we knew it.
Okay, so when I filed a motion to recuse, then she finally got off the case. The case was sent to Elkhart in front of a guy by the name of Judge Donald Jones, who said, hilariously, I guess to him, not to me, that because I didn't follow through with an appeal, I'd waived all these issues. The state never challenged the truth. He just said, well, the appeals court sent you down. You should have been up there. So because you didn't do it up there, I'm going to deny it. Okay, by now Barnes is at the Court of Appeals. But so I'm saying all that to say, I had an opportunity. I tried cases in chains, in shackles many times, being transported to courts, and filed appeals on behalf of guys which were successful. I had some experience. So coming out, because of that reputation, attorneys would come to me. So ultimately, I opened a paralegal support firm and I worked for some of the best lawyers in Indiana and Illinois, northern Illinois, and from central Indiana all the way up to northern. And to this day, I get calls from attorneys that ask me to do research for them. But I'm just saying, I'm not trying to brag.
I took the law course and didn't. I took it many times.
Right.
I couldn't get off the ground. So I know it's not that easy.
Well, but I had. Here's the thing.
But survival.
Well, here's the thing. God showed me that was my ministry. That was one of my ministries. Mm-hmm. I just had a natural talent for it.
You sure did.
And so that's what allowed me to proceed many times pro se. Now, I didn't proceed pro se on the issue of the law enforcement officer admitting to planting evidence and to a reporter and threatening a reporter when she disclosed this. My two attorneys went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. They considered it for 90 days and just denied cert. It never hit any news outlets. And both of my attorneys...
No, my attorney had a big name.
Well, yeah, and these guys didn't.
No.
But here's what you should... This is what the people should understand, what should frighten you. A law enforcement officer admits to gaining a conviction wrongfully by planting evidence. Those are crimes, okay? Then he brags to a reporter when she files a police report and goes public, and nothing ever came of the police report. It was never investigated because he was a law enforcement officer, right? But when we bring this before the courts, the Indiana Court of Appeals, the Indiana Supreme Court, and the United States Supreme Court, they never address that issue on the merits.
No, but here's undergirding it, and I've talked to this before. Gene Zimmerman taught the course, and then there's another guy that he kind of worked with from Chicago,
Right.
more like a Korean kind of guy. And finally they had a debate. This is like the Patriot time.
Right.
This is like when they had, back was it in the 80s, you had the militias, you had the Patriot, and this was the big deal about the law, and so you would have debates. And the one guy says, there are no courts. There are none. It's all appearance.
Yeah.
There really is no substance to our courts at all. They're not looking for truth. They can railroad anything they want. And then Gene said, yeah, that's true, but there's one court, that's article something out of the Constitution, Warren Beatty something, and we actually went there to double check it in downtown DC. So the issue is, at the bottom line of this show, what about our judicial system and where is truth? And if they want to do whatever they want, can truth prevail in that system?
Well, no, truth can't prevail. We talked, as you talked about our Darwinian common law paradigm and or the Harvard Law article featuring Oliver Wendell Holmes and talking about self-government as an experiment and a prediction theory of law and legal formatting versus the input from social interest and public policy.
And then that we're founded on a social contract theory, which is nothing but legal fiction.
Well, yeah.
And even Blackstone says, yeah, it's not true, but we're going to go with it anyway.
Well, okay, so what then happens when, empirically speaking, I have a case, a civil case, I take it to the Seventh Circuit, oral argument, I ask for oral argument, I make the argument, and then the court determines they determine they don't like the facts that are on the record. One fact was the Indiana Attorney General did an investigation into a guy, the realtor that I bought my house from, that kept $26,000, our $12,000 down payment and $1,400 a month payments for like 10 months, and didn't pay his mortgage. So he ended up in foreclosure. We got drug into it, and we've been fighting for 10 years now. Okay, simply he was forced to give us title to the house, the deed to the house, but the deed is stained by his mortgage. Well, the mortgage now, which was $126,000 in principal, is now $400,000, which they're trying to collect for us to clear our title. And to support the Seventh Circuit ruling determination, the Seventh Circuit, and I don't know, folks, if you've ever heard this in American judicial history, there is an opinion that came out that is signed in our case by no judge. It is essentially an inquisition, an anonymous opinion. I'll let that roll around your head. This is truth and fact, an anonymous opinion handed down by 3 judges, we don't know their name, that that came up with a new set of facts that didn't even mention the Attorney General's investigation of what the realtor did. They said that I had acted in conspiracy with the realtor not to pay the mortgage company.
In other words, they're just making this up.
Well, but here's what happened. And then they sanctioned me $13,000 for filing this appeal.
Right, so they're not going to let the law and the facts ever get in their way.
And then they tell me, until you pay this, you can't even file anything in court. Now what difference does it make if it's Darwinian common law paradigm or the prediction theory of law or stare decisis or any of these things that common law is settled or common law is realism? What you have here is evil ruling cloaked in robes.
Well, what do you think about? I've been thinking lately. I said, and I'm just
there's
throwing thoughts around in my head.
Yeah.
I'm going. I think it's the law schools that are where the evil is. I mean, who's fueling this thing, and where should it be corrected?
I think
aren't these professors teaching right? I mean,
I think in my case, the Seventh Circuit, there were 2 judges up there, Frank McKitty and David Hamilton, who during the time I was in prison filed a lawsuit in prison that was heard at Indianapolis, the Southern District of Indiana. And so I attend a settlement conference before Magistrate Sue Shields, who ordered, I'm sitting here in shackles because this time I'm in prison, ordered the correctional officers, there were 2 of them, guarding me out, and the defendant out in the lawsuit, so it's just me and Sue Shields. She asked me, so you had, what judge did you have when you're in your criminal case? And I told her who I had. And the fact that you said everybody knew her daughter had been raped by a black man.
Oh, yeah, everybody knew that in jail.
So when I told her the name, Magistrate Shields looked at me and said, "Keep your mouth shut." Well, essentially, now at the Seventh Circuit a couple years ago, they punished me for opening my mouth. And going up to the Supreme Court on the separate issue of the law enforcement officer admitting to planting evidence, never denied in any filing in that particular case, which also named Pete Buttigieg and his law department, because they were aware of all of this. Okay, so it goes up to the Supreme Court, they consider it for 90 days, and they deny cert. So my lawyers who were, it didn't shock me.
Because they only take a certain percentage.
Well, but don't you think you want a case that it establishes a precedent that allows a law enforcement officer to plant evidence and brag to the media and then threaten to kill a reporter?
Even the other attorneys on the other side thought they should take my case because it was so relevant.
On the other attorneys on my side just simply lied about it. Okay, and so we filed a motion for sanctions. Say, hey, court, they're lying about this. I called the clerks myself at the Supreme Court, and the clerk said, well, they get your motion for sanction, but it's not filed on the record, but all the justices see it. Well, 90 days later, they denied cert. The motion for sanctions was never granted. Peter, it's wickedness.
What do you think of this? In that law class that we took, that he had them all over. It was like a 2-week class. And there's another story that comes to mind. But one time, a professor from Manchester was taking the class, and he said, I had a
Manchester College.
Manchester College. He taught finance there,
right?
But he was taking the class. I think his wife filed for divorce, and he was like crazy, and so he was trying to probably go pro se. And he said, one time I had a stockbroker speak in class, and he stopped his guest lecture, and he said, "Do you know what the number one problem in America is? Probably to get their attention, or he had okay." They didn't know. He said, it's the transfer of wealth to lawyers.
Yeah,
just think about it. We have more lawyers per capita than anybody in the world.
Well, then I defer back to here. What's the scripture say? The love of money is the root of all evil. So
it competes with the love of truth and the love of God. It competes with everything.
It competes with everything. For enough money, people lie. For enough money, judges rule the way they know they shouldn't rule, okay? And lawyers lie to win. I want to read one thing. I always like to establish the foundation for truth. So the first law was created by God, and it comes out of Genesis 9:6. And here's the first law. Whoever sheds human blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made mankind. Brother, look at what happened. So basically, thou shalt not kill. Well, here you have the highest court in the land in Roe v. Wade years ago legalizing killing children.
Well, hold it.
Well, this is what God said clearly.
No, that's why we're a nation of rule of law. But what law? Because obviously it's wrong to commit adultery. But it's not wrong because you can go and sleep with your neighbor's wife anytime you want as long as she consents. Well, didn't you just harm your husband? Well, what's the law say about you sleeping with your neighbor's wife? What's our law say?
It's interesting.
And you can go down the line.
Our courts have legalized sodomy. It is legal. Okay?
They've gone down the whole line.
They've legalized sodomy. We're talking about the courts. Courts did that.
In other words, they're saying, in our eyes, we see no wrong.
So can you imagine a group of adulterers and fornicators going before a court and demanding that fornication and adultery is not only legal, but should be upheld enough to have Fornicators Month?
I know people, African-American people.
Sure.
Good college degrees, get caught up in the civil rights movement lingo, who justify their lesbianism, justify everything because the Supreme Court says it's all right. I'm not kidding you.
That's why we're here today. As we discuss justice, Pontius Pilate's statement to Jesus continues to ring in my ear. What's truth? Their truth is the courts validated us. Our truth, because we're both children of God, is this Bible, which said homosexuality is a sin. They say, well, that's in the Old Testament, and you don't expect us to not
We're
eat
under
shellfish
grace, not law.
Well, but you don't expect. They'll point to Leviticus and say, well, you don't make. So you wear
Two sets of garments.
But they don't understand civil law and common law and moral law. They don't understand those laws apply to the Jews. Jesus restated the two meaningful aspects of the Ten Commandments in the gospel, and he also doubled down on what homosexuality is by stating what marriage is.
Right.
So that's but they don't want to hear that. They'll point to over and over again. They'll put their fingers in their ears and do like a kid, la 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 la. When you mention this law, and they'll point man's law. Well, God.
Well, the argument is with the Civil War, you had a ton of Marxists coming from the 1848 Marxist revolutions in Europe, and the states-based. I mean, that's why Robert E. Lee said, "Oh, I'm a Virginian first." Yeah. Okay, your loyalty was you're under mostly state law. Mostly all state law ruled every action.
Right.
Then with the Civil War, the U.S. Constitution, which is the only constitution that does not acknowledge God.
Right.
Okay, so now you have that perspective, a godless perspective, now ruling everything, and then you go back to we the people. So Declaration of Independence says where does authority come from? Well, it comes from the people.
Well, but the same people will say America's a Christian country. Well, first of all, a country can't be a Christian because a country doesn't have a soul, so that negates that. But the reality is, you just look at the rulings, you look at the laws of this country. They're ungodly. They're ungodly laws.
Well,
Well, how do we know that? Because they're not of God. You see what I'm saying? They will argue you down. Well, the law, that's a violation of law. Well, the law says thou shalt not kill, but you kill babies in the name of health care.
Well, what I've been looking at, and I think it's significant, that as soon as Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, then the next thing he did, it was a couple months later, he went into the Virginia legislature, which he was part of, and passed laws removing the whole basis of a monarchy. Okay, which is the right of the firstborn son. So the king, what was the king before he became king? He was crown prince. Right. He was the firstborn son, and that came from the Bible.
Right.
Okay, see, so when you have a family, and let's, now it's 1 or 2 kids, but back in our day, it was probably 4, 5, 6, 7 kids.
Sure.
So you probably had on the average 2 brothers.
Right.
Okay, so you got 3 brothers, one's the oldest son.
Right.
And what education used to be was the father training his oldest son, like Joseph and Jesus, training him at his side to be what he wanted him to be.
Well, but because of government intervention in the 60s, many black families were told if you want government help, the man can't be here.
They're undermining it, but Jefferson undermined the biblical concept that the oldest son is set apart. He's not equal.
But go back to the garden. That's Satan's attack was against the family. He went to Eve to destabilize headship in the family.
Well, that's
the whole intent.
That this country basically was envious because there's 4 brothers.
Okay.
Here's the oldest brother. He gets double portion and a lot more.
Yep.
You think those 4 brothers could be tempted to envy?
Yeah.
And we're going to bring our other brother down.
Joseph.
Bring him down, make him equal.
Sure.
Well, isn't that what say? I mean, so you have the older brother has no special right. We talk about rights. Oh, the rights. How about the right of the firstborn son? No, he doesn't get any.
Well, again, but you're going to the Bible to establish the truth of the matter.
How to order a family.
Right. And so this is what happens in the courts. You just said we don't have the Bible in the court. You put your hand on the Bible and raise your hand. They don't do that anymore. Right is determined by what they say. Right is determined by all this.
Then ultimately, the people, and then the media controls how the people think.
Well, see, right is broken down now into what the left, who essentially controls the media. The major media outlets are controlled by
liberal.
Are controlled by liberals,
which are people that basically believe in evolution, and
they believe like Taylor Swift believes that stupidly, incredibly. this very popular woman believes that God says it's okay to practice abortion. That is their idol. See, we have Americans worship idols.
Well, look what happened. Okay, you had the American Revolution.
Right.
After the American Revolution was over, the Treaty of Paris, 1783.
No.
We sent our people over to France. Thomas Paine,
Right.
James Monroe, Thomas Jefferson, to church plant,
Right.
to get these same ideas planted over in France.
Yeah.
It didn't work going to England. Okay, so when they had their revolution, what did they do? They went into their main church, Notre Dame, and who did they exalt?
Yeah.
The most famous prostitute, courtesan
Yeah.
of Paris. So what do men want to do? They want to worship a female, okay?
Yeah.
And they know, every demon in hell knows that.
Yeah.
And what do you think Taylor Swift, where does she fit into this? Because that's what men want to do.
But that's why it's incumbent upon us in this time that God has allowed us in this in this show, and I really thank God for you, to bring people back to the realization that all law flows from God.
It says there's only one lawgiver.
Yeah, it all flows from God. So what you do is you either falsify what God says, which appeals to people. You don't have to be a slave to this word. You don't have to be. See, now you're getting into Romans 1:1, where the Apostle Paul says, "I, Paul, a doulos." Jude calling himself a doulos. Peter in his epistle calling himself a doulos. Jesus calling himself a doulos. Well, what's a doulos? A bondslave.
Well, the hard part for a preacher is we preach Christ as Lord.
Right.
And ourselves as your doulos.
Yeah.
In other words, I'm your doulos.
Yeah.
Well, how many preachers really want to do that?
Well, that's why we named our church Doulos Chapel. We want, and we had some homosexual opponents that laughed at us. Yeah, he names his church after a slave. Well, I wouldn't expect you to understand that, because you have a different master.
Nobody understood Christ when he was here.
Yeah.
He's the Messiah? No way. He rides on a donkey? That's for slaves.
Well, but Israel is a perfect example. Today, Israel still doesn't believe that he was the Messiah.
No.
So when people ask me what do I think about Israel, I tell them that less than 15% of Israel Christians, and they still don't accept Jesus, and they'll still have to go through the time of Jacob's trouble.
Well, it's a little bit of a mystery. I was in Kalamazoo, and you know that area up there a little bit, and I went to this, do some shock wave on my toe, which I injured, and the fella was doing it was from Gaza, okay? And I talked to him a long time. He was Muslim,
Right.
and we went through the whole theology, Adam and Eve. How much do we believe? Quite a bit.
Right.
Okay, Jesus was a virgin born, did miracles, but when he was on the cross, they shifted people and this and that, and he had relatives and friends that have killed since October 7th.
Right.
Okay, so it's amazing how much, if you sit down with a Muslim, that we can agree.
Yeah.
And the Jews officially believe that Jesus was born of a whore.
Right.
His dad, the father was a Roman soldier, which was despicable.
Right.
And he's burning in hell in excrement.
Yeah.
And this comes from the Jewish scholars like at Princeton or wherever.
Sure.
This is just the official teaching.
Sure.
Well, the common ground is not a lot there.
Right.
We're aiming to love them. We go to the Jews first.
Right.
But we got to be honest.
Well, and that's, again, truth that only comes from here. I want to, and we've got some time left, I want to just kind of speak empirically of a more recent occurrence. We talked about the case that went up to the Supreme Court, Sims versus Buttigieg, and the Supreme Court didn't touch it. So after that case, the law enforcement officer now is emboldened. He sues my attorney and I for defaming him, for saying that he told the reporter that he had planted evidence and then threatened her life, although he's never denied it in any filing. So we file a motion asking the court to allow us to do depositions, because we can get the reporter to prove he said. Remember in Indiana, the defense to defamation is the truth. So that's Indiana, what's called black letter of the law. Okay, so in our answer, we filed an answer and then a counterclaim. In our answer, we say, hey, he said what he said, and we're going to put him on his truth, and we're going to bring in the police officer that took the statement from the reporter herself. We're going to bring in Karen DePape, who's the director of communications, that heard all of the tapes in South Bend, where this officer and other officers are bragging about planting evidence in my case and other men's cases. And Jesse Davis, who is an activist, and Derek Dieter, who's a former police officer, president of city council, and now county commissioner, and Pat Cottrell, a former police officer. He was the SWAT teammate of Tim Corbett, and also the president of the Board of Public Safety. These are really esteemed people. We want to bring those in. On January 2nd, before John Broughton, the Circuit Court of St. Joe County, an attorney appeared for us. You have to listen to this, folks, that never signed in a contract with me, who had told Attorney John Ulmer, remember the law enforcement officer sued me and John Ulmer, Attorney Ulmer, for defaming him. He had told John Ulmer 3 months ago he wasn't going to represent John in the case because it was a conflict of interest for him. That lawyer with the stated conflict of interest, who never had a legal contract with me, showed up at the hearing and agreed to allow John Broughton to say, we're not going to have the other side, Tim Corbett, do any discovery. You have to answer the discovery, okay? After the hearing, when we found out this guy appeared, we said, so what happened? He never responded. We then requested the transcript. The court reporter, I requested the transcript as a journalist. You and I, Dave Frank and I did Stand Up America. You and I have done TV since 1997. Okay, I do weekly shows. I mean, I did What's Truth? Was it an international? You know, I am a journalist, so I asked as a journalist of Judge John Broughton's court reporter. He tells me he doesn't have to give it to me. He says you represent it. So the other lawyer that does represent me, that didn't go that wasn't there that day. I don't know exactly why he wasn't there, but he asked the court reporter for the transcript. The court reporter said, I'm really busy now, but I'll get back to you at the end of the day and tell you when you can get the transcript. We're still waiting for the transcript.
Never did. He lied.
30 days ago, and John Broughton enters a ruling on February 1st, either January 31st or February 1st, saying, I'm going to strip all of your counts. You can't raise an affirmative defense, which, what do you mean I can't raise an affirmative defense? And none of which was discussed in the hearing is in his order. And the only reason we know it's in his order, because my attorney, who rightfully represented us, who wasn't there that day, sends an email to Tim Corbett's attorney saying, hey, when can we conduct discovery? And that's when it all came out that Judge Broughton has said, we're not going to allow you to do discovery. We're going to have Tim Corbett.
How is that going to sustain itself on appeal?
There's no such thing as one-sided discovery, and you can't raise an affirmative defense. And we still haven't gotten a transcript.
What, do they own the appeal court judges in order to get away with that?
Well, I mean, remember Sims versus Buttigieg? Well, we originally raised all of this with Tim Corbett. They never addressed it. The Indiana Supreme Court never addressed it. The United States Supreme Court never addressed this law enforcement never denying that he said he planted evidence to gain my conviction and then threatened the court reporter.
Because they have enough power in and of itself, they don't have to address it.
That's my point about justices and the justices and judges. They do whatever they want to do, and it's not going to be exposed by the media because they control the media.
Well, that's why we read that verse, by justice, a king gives a country stability, which means, in other words, going by the law of God.
Right.
You give a country the stability as you, in other words, the definition of tyranny.
Yes.
The definition of a tyrant is one who does not rule by the law of God.
Yep.
That's what makes you a tyrant.
Yep.
That's not America's definition.
Well, but you know, you go back to in First Kings, when you go back to First Kings, and you and I talked about this. You go back to First Kings, and you see when the conversation between Solomon. I'm sorry, not Solomon. Here, let's get it here. What do I need? First Kings, where the people asked for.
Oh, ask for a king.
First Samuel's. I'm sorry, First Samuel's.
Well, Samuel, his sons had corrupted themselves.
Right.
And so the people got scared.
Well, they didn't follow
and they go,
God's
hold
law.
it here, our future is going to look bleak because these guys can't that represent God. And so well, we want a king, like all the other nations.
Yeah, at 1 Samuel 8, Israel asked for a king. But when they got a king, God said, he said that, listen to all the people who are saying to you, it is not you they've rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. And then he told them what they would do. In the rest of 1 Samuel 8, he told them. And so the original formula, when God rested and said everything was good, that was because the world was then a theocracy. Adam walked with God every day. He didn't need a judge. He walked with God. Adam, he was a sinless man.
But let's go back.
Okay.
Adam was the perfect doulos.
Yes.
He was a slave to God.
Yes.
And that was his highest glory.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
Why was he a slave? Because he had to obey God.
He obeyed God.
Yeah. A slave, what's a slave? I mean, you could say there's many ways to define slavery, but Galatians 4:1.
Yeah.
A child is the same as a slave until he's emancipated.
Yeah.
So what's a child? A lot of times people, in my childhood was my favorite time of life. Yeah. Not for everybody, of course. But a child has to obey his parents.
Well, if you don't, sometimes you end up dead.
Jesus
Sometimes
said if you curse your parents, you're to be put to death.
Yeah.
So that's pretty strict stuff if you're under parents. And what is a slave? A slave's still part of the household.
Well, of course.
He's still part of the household.
That's why the word is doulos, the Greek word, because you go back to Old Testament when it was a bondservant, when the Jews held firm to the fact that after 7 years that
they had a separate rule.
Right.
But the heathen could be enslaved
forever.
That's what it says.
Right. But the Jews, because there was God's people and God's law said, well, after a certain time, you can set them free. A doulos is somebody when you come to me and say, hey, you're set free, and I go, Peter, you've taken care of my family, you provided livelihood for me, I'm going to stay your doulos, okay? And you have to remember, a lot of slaves, see, this is where it gets wrong, in the New Testament, were doctors. They think in terms of slave as somebody who's carrying pushing a wine cart or so many of the people were people captured during the times that these other cultures would be overrun, and so you'd have doctors and teachers and what we call professional people being slaves.
Well, so the main thing to look at, first of all, Jesus describes slavery as slavery to sin, fundamentally.
Exactly.
Okay? Fundamentally. See, so if freedom is a good thing, but not in and of itself. So if your freedom causes you to endanger your soul more, in other words, you're going to be sinning more because of that freedom, then cut that hand of freedom off to save your soul, because that freedom is not going to do you good.
Peter, I found freedom in prison. For 42 years, I was free to be an adulterer and a fornicator, to be a triple addicted to alcohol, cocaine, and marijuana, thinking I was free. And then in the wilderness, during the time that, as Joseph said, Genesis 50:19, what you intended for evil, God intended for good. God spoke to me, stepped out of time in prison, and he said, are you ready to listen now? And because of the freedom that I had exercised had allowed me to sin, it wasn't even just destroying me, it was destroying everyone around me.
Part of what you were drawing on was America's idea of freedom.
Absolutely.
And you were naively, or who knows what,
right.
But in any case, you probably were drawing on the idea of freedom that's in the air.
I'm my own man, and I'm the captain for my ship. Okay, that's
self-government.
Yeah,
this
that's
is an experiment.
see that, but that's what controls the minds of the unsaved. I don't want to go to church. I'm not going to have anybody tell me what to do. Well, I'd much rather have Jesus tell me what to do than self, which is really Satan telling me what to do. And so that's what rules the courts. They consider that's how you get abortion is legal, because self-rule. That's how you get two men land with men, two women land with women is legal.
Well, then,
that's self-rule. That's what because Satan, from the very beginning, did God really say?
Well, here's the social contract theory that comes from Locke that Jefferson was like that with. And it's Darwinian, because the social contract theory, which Blackstone himself calls legal fiction, is, well, we were all just kind of like independent integers. We were all basically like little gods.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I guess that's right, because we did eat the fruit.
Yeah.
And God said they have become like one of us, little gods. Right. Okay? Right. So it's natural to think we are. Well, it's not the truth, but it's natural to think you are.
The truth was death came from that. And so mankind has been dying ever since.
But that's our legal system is founded on this idea that we are all independent little gods, and government is created because you can't function. You bump into each other. Okay, and so we create a government where the Bible says God ordained.
Yeah, the world was meant to be a theocracy, where we all walk with God.
Well, did you create your kid? A lot of parents think, well, I created that kid.
No, you did.
You did?
Yeah. I mean, life comes from God. See, that's why this show, brother, is so important, because hopefully, there are a lot of, and I love doing your shows because there are a lot of enlightened people. You look at the comments later, and they're just people who get it and think it's great that we're doing this. But there are a lot of people who don't get it, who think everything is fine, who think that this is a government of laws, but if we can get this guy, this Republican or this Democrat in, then everything, it won't be, because our courts don't follow laws, because they do not follow the Bible.
Right, and the problem is we have more lawyers per capita than any other nation. So the judicial system, which is obviously almost all lawyers, but
of course, you look at the legislatures in Indiana, it's almost 40% lawyers.
But see, you're supposed to have a separation of powers, but the lawyers run the legislature division. The lawyers, especially with Biden and Obama, they're lawyers.
Yeah.
Hunter's a lawyer.
Yeah.
So they run the executive, and they run the judicial. So where's the separation of powers?
Well, there isn't. They determine what's truth. They determine what should be. As Rudy Giuliani said years ago, he said he could prosecute a ham sandwich. You determine. I realized in my legal research, which was a surprise, that a trial is not about seeking the truth. A trial is about being able to prove every element that the prosecutors charge you with. Knowingly and intentionally that. Okay, whatever that is, you could be guilty. I mean, you could be innocent and get convicted. I was innocent and got convicted. Well, they had help.
Well, Oliver Wendell Holmes said it was a game, and one time my brother was arguing a case up in Madison, and I was visiting. I said, well, come on to the courtroom, okay? Well, then afterwards, the other lawyers are getting together, and we talk about truth, and my brother goes, it's not about truth.
It's not about truth.
Okay, and then Gene Zimmerman taught the law course, and his case started out because he had a bad situation there in Milwaukee. So he's going to court with his lawyer, and he goes, boy, we got the truth on our side. And the lawyer looks at him and rebukes him. It's not about the truth, it's about the appearance of truth, which we know it's not even that.
Well, if you look at the Seventh Circuit and the ruling that I talked about, where you had 3 anonymous in doing a research to ask for a rehearing in bank, which they denied, I asked this one question: how is it possible in American law that you can have an opinion handed down in a court of appeals without any judge's name appearing on it?
So you're dealing with the nuts and bolts of how it actually proves to be. Where's the truth?
That's called an inquisition. You go into a courtroom and there's a mirror there that you sit, and someone's on the other side speaking to you, and you're trying to figure out who's speaking.
Well, what you have here is you had the anti-Masonic Party before around, I think, about 28. And what happened was somebody killed a Mason. Somebody killed a fellow Mason because he spilled the beans, and you're not supposed to spill the beans. Okay, so there's a procedure on how you wipe the guy out. You know, you do this, that, and so he got. I mean,
which is witchcraft. Okay?
He got killed by the book.
Right.
Well.
Okay, the book.
They found out
he got killed legally. Right?
By their book.
You see what I'm saying? What's truth? It's relative.
By the Masonic book.
Right.
So he'd go to court or he'd go to jail. Well, they were all Masons. The sheriff was a Mason. He'd let him out. Then he'd go here. It went all the way up to the governor. This happened in Batavia, New York. All the way to the governor of New York. He was a Mason. He let him out. And so the anti-Masonic party started because the whole country found out this is a joke. Because county, state, and federal government people were Masons.
Well, here's a shocker. I just had lunch with a pastor, Pastor Graylin Watson. You know Graylin.
Oh, yeah.
And Graylin was telling me about an encounter he had down south, and I think he was visiting in Georgia, where the church was led by Masons, and he called them out.
Well, I'm not saying how powerful they are now, but
well, apparently they're pretty
maybe
powerful.
They still are.
Yeah, I don't know, but I mean, for him, they vandalized his church and vehicles on his church. They placed a snake in his parking lot. He's showing the pictures of all of this. But the reality is, that's in a church. That's a pastor. A pastor who's supposed to, be a doulos, now has another covering, which is, of course, the witchcraft of the Masonic beliefs.
Well, basically what you're looking at here is a type of sorcery.
Well, it's
a type of Talmudic double talk.
Well, see, here's the whole thing why we sit here. We're united in the truth. Why? Because our Father is the God of truth.
If we get lost in the conversation, we have a way to find where we're at.
I tell people this in my church. Whenever there's a disagreement, I follow Matthew 18, and I have this person. Somebody comes, a pastor, this guy. I said, wait, meet me in my office. Go get the other guy and sit down. And you'll be amazed at how that reduces these issues. But what I tell them if they do come is, I'm not interested in who is right. What I'm interested is what is right.
And then we can go from there.
Yeah, what is right? Let's establish first. Because I may like the guy. It may be my wife or somebody.
That's what a judge has to do. He has to look at the law and the facts.
But they won't. With the statute of justice being blind, I have seen justice lift the blind and see me on that side and see the establishment on that side and say he can't win even though he has the truth, because it would embarrass the establishment.
See, I think it's gotten worse. Because even my dad always said, but lawyers keep their mouth shut. So I didn't learn anything from my dad.
Because see, this is the reason they don't like, and I want you to finish that, but I want to tell you something, you and I, they don't like pro se litigants because we don't have.
That was the whole case of the law course we took.
Because we don't have a license that they can take. See, they can hold the license over the attorneys are afraid. Their attorneys are interested in the show, who I invited to come, and because they'll lose their license.
No, that's why pro se's were dangerous.
When we raised the issue of the law enforcement officer, Tim Corbett, doing what he did, bragging about planting evidence and threatening a reporter, the response for the Supreme Court, Indiana Supreme Court Disciplinary Commission, was to investigate my two lawyers.
That's why, had you been pure pro se, because even I know what happened when you got put into jail.
Yeah, you were here. And most people did. Most people thought
your lawyer basically betrayed you.
Of course, he sold me out.
Yeah. What else? But see, now you know. Yeah. What was I?
I was foolishly trusting. Well, I know that I didn't rape my wife. This can't. I know. You know what I'm saying? But I was convicted and spent 12 years in prison.
But see, that's why the lawyer is an officer of the court. And that's why the whole legal profession is problematic, okay? Because they're controlled, and it's gotten worse.
They're controlled by another God, a little g God. I want people to understand the answer is here. If justice, judges, and even politicians were controlled, you look at Nehemiah, you look at Joseph, these were politicians. They were Christians, okay? That when politicians say, well, I'm a politician, but I have to put Jesus aside.
You only got 3 minutes.
Sure.
Let me just throw in the last, because it's like my dad graduated from Notre Dame in political science. But if you go earlier, it was Christian politics. Okay, see now, after the Civil War especially, it's political science.
Yeah.
Based on what?
Yeah.
Okay, and it used to be based political Christian politics. It was based on the law of God. With the Civil War especially,
Yeah.
boom, it goes to so-called science. And what's the Bible say? Science falsely
Well,
so-called.
when David erred, who was a man after God's own heart, who was there? Nathan to correct him. So even you should have a Nathan. If you know. Anyway, I just want to explain real quick. I wear this because I'm a Marine Corps veteran, and the first Gentile saved was Cornelius.
right.
And I'm a Marine veteran pastor who ministers to veterans that have PTSD. So I always like them to know that. That's why I wear this, folks, if you have any questions.
Well, how many people have
PTSD, yeah.
PTSD from all sorts of things?
Caused by our government.
Well, I'm just saying, a girl can get raped.
Yeah.
And that can...
Of course. But I do it as a veteran. That's my ministry. Because veterans like to talk to people who've been there and done that. So I just wanted to explain that to them. There are other types of PTSD, yes.
Yeah.
But this is my ministry.
Right.
We went from caring for the homeless now to caring for veterans.
That's good.
We got 2 minutes left.
We got 2 minutes.
You take it away, brother.
Well, our military, its might makes right. And we got our military controlled by their commander-in-chiefs and all that.
Sinful people who send veterans to get killed.
And a lot of the old veterans are not encouraging their sons to join like they used to.
Well, because we've seen it. I've been fighting now for my benefits from the VA for years, and I think they just want me to die. But yet they'll give billions to Ukraine and Israel and whoever else.
Right. So the Bible says pray for those in authority, and
Yeah.
it tells us to do that for a reason.
Yeah.
And we can believe
Yeah.
God, the heart of the king is in the hands of the Lord, and he directs it wherever he wants. So we do need to pray for those in authority because they are causing some havoc.
And ultimately when they fail, we know our God is sovereign.
And these are all judgments of God, and in a way we should be delighting in the judgments of God.
Amen, brother. Amen.
Which is a challenge.
Amen. Thank you for having me on. God bless you.
Okay, Mario, good to have you. We need to keep more in touch, and anything comes up that we need to get on here,
I'll update you.
okay,
All right,
good
brother.
enough.
Thanks.
This is Pastor Mario Sims and Peter Helland on Citizens for Community Media here in South Bend, Notre Dame community.